What's going on, duelists? It's your boy Nick, bringing you today on the channel combos for my updated Vendread deck profile for the post Maze of the Master format, featuring the brand new Duke of Demise fusion monster from the Maze of the Master set. For those of you new to the channel, welcome. My name is Nick. We do Yu-Gi-Oh content mainly focused around rogue and casual decks alike. If that's the kind of Yu-Gi-Oh that you're interested in, then I highly encourage you to smash that subscribe button. We are currently working our way to 3,000 subscribers, and I need your help to get there. So Vendread is a deck that I obviously have been working on the channel for quite a few months now, testing different variants, doing live duel videos, combos, test hands, different deck profiles, the whole 9 yards. I've probably covered more Vendread than any other YouTube content creator in the history of YouTube. And it's an archetype that I personally really enjoy, despite its shortcomings and its flaws, because the deck is far from perfect, obviously. It does struggle with a lot of different things, even with the pseudo-indirect support, if you could call it, from Supreme Darkness. The deck still struggles with a lot of different things, and it's more definitely a rogue deck by all means. I'm not saying that the deck is tier 1. You know, I'm not trying to hype anybody up on that kind of copium. It's just a deck that I enjoy. I'm well aware of its shortcomings, but despite that, I still want to continue bringing content to a lot of you duelists, because I know a lot of people, like myself, happen to actually like the deck and are curious to see what some of the combos and things that I've come up with. Now, the release of Duke of Demise in Maze of the Master brings this deck an interesting line that we can use Ghost Fusion to make this card, and it does grant the deck an additional normal summon, which is actually pretty strong. It's a really good effect. There are some clunky hands that this deck can produce, and having the ability to have a secondary normal summon is something that shouldn't be overlooked. I will have the profile for the update post-Maze linked in the description down below, as well as a link to my Discord. It's absolutely free to join. I started a Discord a couple months back, and it's been slowly growing as a community. You know, there I'm able to talk to other duelists like myself who share the same passion and enjoy the things that I bring to the channel, and we kind of collaborate with each other. There you'll see some sneak peeks of certain things that I'm working on. I usually post images of deck lists and just kind of chat with some of the members of the Discord. So if that's something that you would like to do, then by all means feel free to join. Again, links in the description down below. Before we get started with the combos in this video, one thing I do want to touch on is I did make a slight update to the deck list post-Maze, different from what was profiled. Like I said, the profile is linked below, but there was only 2 minor changes. The first change was in the main deck. I got rid of the 3rd Volcarion, the Rotting Phoenix, for 1 copy of Shinobi Necro. This is more just a personal preference thing. I just really like Shinobi Necro as a card, and I felt that it did deserve a slot in the deck. Now, it's definitely not required by any stretch. I personally do feel like the 3rd Volcarion's probably just better, but I really just have a soft spot for this card, and I just chose to play it. I mean, the deck, it's not like the deck is any worse by running it, necessarily. So I just want to preface that very quickly. I'm only playing 2 Volcarion, down from 3 that was featured in the profile, and in its slot I'm playing the 1 Shinobi Necro in the main deck. And then for the second change that I made at the list is with the extra deck specifically, and that was I cut Elder Entity Entis from the extra, as well as the Nightmare Unicorn, in favor of 1 copy of IP Masquerena and 1 copy of SP Little Knight. Now, this change is for mainly a couple things. I've always wanted to play IP in this deck because I think she's just an amazing link monster for a deck like this. And then I wanted to add the SP back because obviously in the variant that I, profiled, I was running Nightmare Unicorn instead, and that was only to give me an additional Fiend monster to be able to make the Abao Aku, the Link 4 that we run in our extra deck. But after doing some more testing, I just felt that play, like going Unicorn into Abao, just didn't really come up all that much. And because we weren't playing IP, we were never able to make Unicorn in the opponent's turn to really maximize its value as a disrupt. We could only go into it on our turn, which just made it feel pretty lackluster most of the time. In those instances, you'd rather just have like an SP Little Knight. So, like I said, I cut Elder Entity Entis. She's not gone completely, however. I did move the Entis to the side deck, because she does still come up with there's certain diviner plays, and because we also play Ultimate Slayer in the side. So I just moved the Entis to the sideboard, and then I cut the Unicorn, and in both of those vacant slots, I replaced them with 1 IP and 1 SP Little Knight respectively. So just to preface that, because obviously I'm going to be featuring certain combos in this deck, and if these cards come up, I don't want any of you duelists scratching your heads as to like, why is this different from the profile? Those are the only changes that I've made since I've profiled the deck post-Maze. So with that very long-winded intro out of the way, let's get started with some combos. We're going to start with a 2-card combo featuring Necromancer as well as Ready Fusion. This is a very interesting 2-card line. This will feature the new Duke of Demise monster, so I just want to lead with a 2-card setup featuring this. So we're going to start things off by normal summoning Dark Necromancer using the effect to send a zombie ritual from the hand or deck to grave, and then if we do, we can add a ritual spell from the deck to our hand. So we are going to be sending a copy of Vendread Slayer. Note, this is just a 2-card combo. Obviously, we would have additional cards in hand if this was an actual test hand. We're going to dump the Slayer and then add a copy of Vendread Evolution to our hand. Now, once we've resolved that, we're going to go ahead and commit our Ready Fusion, which will pay 1,000 of our life points, and go ahead and special summon out a level 6 or lower non-effect fusion monster from our extra deck, of which our target for that is going to be Allvain, the Essence of Vanity. What's important here is the fact that Ready Fusion makes us pay 1,000 life for its activation cost. That's relevant because in order to maximize the value on our Ghost Fusion, which is a fusion spell we use to make Duke of Demise, we really need to have lower life than the opponent. And this, in my opinion, is just the easiest way to do that when we're going first. Allvain, the Essence of Vanity, is a level 2 tuner monster, and Dark Necromancer is obviously a level 4 non-tuner. So with these two monsters, we are going to go ahead and synchro summon into our copy of Immortal Dragon, who is a level 6 synchro requiring just generic material. Once we're at this point, we can use Immortal Dragon's effect to send a zombie from our deck to the graveyard. And we are going to send a copy of our Ghost Sleeper, the Underworld Princess, which will trigger her effect in grave when she's sent to the graveyard, allowing us to add a copy of Ghost Fusion from the deck to our hand. And this is how we get into the Ghost Fusion setup. And keep in mind, because we've already resolved Ready Fusion this turn, our life is lower than our opponent's, assuming we went first. You know, we would have 7,000 to their 8,000. Now, at this point, something important to note is that Immortal Dragon's level does change by the difference of the monster that you sent compared to himself. So he is now a level 3. That really only is relevant if you're going to continue doing synchro plays, but we're not in this particular combo. This is just to feature how to get to Duke of Demise. So his level is pretty irrelevant, at least for the purposes of this combo in particular. So now that we're at this juncture, we can go ahead and activate our Ghost Fusion here. This is going to allow us to fusion summon using zombie monsters we control as material, but if our life points are lower than our opponents, which they are because we've resolved Ready Fusion this turn, we're able to also banish up to 1 zombie from our hand, deck, or grave as material. So we are going to use the Immortal Dragon on board as material, and then we get to banish from our deck a zombie monster, which will be our copy of Chang-Chi the Spirit Owl in this case, which will allow us to fusion summon our copy of Duke of Demise, because he does just require 2 fiend and or zombie monsters as material. And this is pretty much how we get into our Duke play. Now, what's important to note is that if we didn't start with a Necromancer, obviously for the purposes of this combo we did, but if you just did like a test hand, and you didn't have Necromancer in the hand, but you had like access to Ready Fusion and a way to foolish the Ghost Sleeper, for example, you could still add the Ghost Fusion in hand, and then in that instance, when you Ghost Fusion, you'll use a material from field, and then the zombie you banish from deck could actually just be the Necromancer, and that would get you into a Vendread line, obviously, which is pretty strong. But for the purpose of this combo, we're going to banish the Spirit Owl instead. Once that occurs, Spirit Owl does have a trigger effect that will apply. When she's banished, she's able to banish 1 zombie from the grave to then special summon herself back from the banish zone. But if she leaves the field, you place her on the bottom of the deck. And the card we're going to banish from our graveyard for that is a copy of Necromancer himself, which will also trigger Necromancer's effect since he was banished to special summon himself back to the board as well. And you can kind of see how quickly that this 2-card combo starts to like plus you in value, because we've gotten 3 bodies right now for a single normal summon investment, and we haven't even committed to our Vendread line yet, which is completely still set up because we have a Slayer in grave with an evolution in our hand still that we haven't even committed to yet, which I think is really cool. Now, at this point, we can use the Chang-Chi's effect on field to go ahead and Foolish Burial a zombie. Generally, depending on how your hand looks, this will dictate what you're sending. But again, because this is just a 2-card combo featuring Necromancer and Ready Fusion, the card we want to send here specifically is going to be Vendread Striges. And the reason for this is because Striges has an effect that when he's sent to grave, you can reveal a Vendread card in hand, which we do have, the evolution, and he will special summon himself from the graveyard but banish it when it leaves the field. Now, we could send any Vendread in that instance. We could send Houndhorde, we could send Core, because obviously both Houndhorde and Core have effects that can bring themselves back. But because we're going to use these monsters for link plays, I would rather just burn the Striges here on a link play as opposed to burning like something like a Core or a Houndhorde on a link play, because Core and Houndhorde, in my opinion, have the better effects to give to the rituals anyway. The Striges effect that he can give to a ritual is something that isn't like essential to the combo. So I'm more willing to burn this card on a link play as opposed to like summoning a Houndhorde here and then linking the Houndhorde off, and then it would just be banished. Whereas you would rather just use that Houndhorde to ritual summon and apply the Houndhorde's inherited effect on that ritual to give you a better end board. But at this point here, we're basically got 4 free bodies on field to do whatever we so choose with. We're not locked into anything specific, at least at the moment. And like I said, we still haven't even committed to our Vendread play. And this is why I feel that, you know, Necromancer plus Ready Fusion is such a really powerful 2-card combo in this deck. Obviously, assuming it resolves. But it just gives you access to so many different things. Because at this point here, the world is pretty much your oyster. You know, even if we get nibbed at this point, like, we don't even care. Because, again, we still have our Vendread line to fall back on, which is obviously really strong. So generally, what I like doing here is I'll take the Necromancer and the Striges, and I'll link those away to make our first link summon of Vampire Sucker here in the extra monster zone. She does require 2 zombies as material. Note that the Striges will banish itself when it leaves because of its own restriction. Now what we can do is we can finally commit to our Vendread line. Or, depending on how you build your extra deck, you can also make a rank 6 play here at this point as well. Something else, before we dive any further, that I'm forgetting to mention, my apologies, is the fact that depending on how our hand looks here, you know, obviously this combo is very based on how your hand looks. We can choose to use the Duke of Demise's additional normal summon effect here at this point. Like, if we opened a hand of, like, Diviner, Necromancer, and Ready Fusion, which is, like, the God hand, right? At this point, we would be able to use Duke of Demise's additional normal summon effect to bring out that Diviner, and then go down the Diviner line, dump Herald, and it would just give you even more value here. But obviously, since this is just a 2-card combo, we don't have a monster in our hand to normal summon at this point, so we're not going to be using that effect of Duke of Demise here. But it is just something to keep in the back of your mind that, you know, depending on what your hand looks like, you could use Duke of Demise to get an additional body on the field if you so choose. So now that we're here, we're going to go ahead and use Vendread Evolution. This is going to send a Vendread monster from our deck to grave. We're just going to send a copy of Scar, specifically, because we want to summon the Slayer that's in our graveyard. So we're going to send the Scar of the Vendread to ritual summon out our Slayer, who's in our graveyard. We'll go Chainlink 1 Sucker, because she is mandatory, and then Chainlink 2 Scar to search for a Vendread spell Trap, of which that spell Trap will be a copy of Vendread Reorigin. Really good, powerful trap, in my opinion. And then we'll get the draw off the Sucker, obviously. The draw is just a random. It doesn't matter what it is. It's just a free plus for the purposes of this combo. But that's what this blank card represents, is the draw off of Sucker. Now that we're here, there's a couple of different routes you can take this. Now, one thing that I like doing, since I added the addition of IP to the extra deck, is I can take my Duke of Demise and my Slayer and link them off for an IP Masquerena play, which is obviously very strong because that will trigger the graveyard effect of our Slayer. Since he was ritual summoned and sent to grave, that will allow us to add a ritual spell from the deck to our hand, which will be a copy of drawing a blank on the name, it's been a long day. Ravenous Vendread, and then I will send a Vendread from the deck to the graveyard, which will usually be our copy of Houndhorde in this instance. Now that we're here, we have access to quite a few interesting things. For starters, we could choose to use the Duke of Demise in our graveyard. He does have a really cool graveyard effect where we're able to banish this card from grave and then target a level 4 or higher fiend or zombie in our graveyard and add it to our hand. So we could banish our Duke here, and that will allow us to simply add back our copy of Dark Necromancer to our hand, effectively giving us really strong follow-up for the next turn. You know, in addition to the free draw that we already have off the sucker, which is like really cool in my opinion. And then what we do here is we can go Hound Horde's graveyard effect, discarding a Vendread card from our hand, which will be our copy of Reorigin, to special itself from the grave, but banish it when it leaves the field. And now what we'll do is we'll go Ravenous Vendread here, allowing us to special summon from our hand, deck, or grave and face down defense a Vendread monster, which will be our copy of Revenants. And then immediately after this card resolves, we will ritual summon using the summon monster and other monsters we control as material. So we're going to tribute our face down Revenants, tribute our Hound Horde, who will be banished by its own effect, and that will allow us to ritual summon our Vendread Slayer again from our graveyard. This time, though, having both the inherited effects of Revenants as well as the inherited effect of Hound Horde, meaning that our Slayer at quick effect speeds can banish an opponent's spell trap as well as banish an opponent's special summon monster once per turn each, which makes the Slayer pretty formidable as far as end bosses are concerned. Because a monster on the field was tributed, we are able to use the graveyard effect of our Scar Vendread, allowing us to banish one other zombie from our grave. In this particular instance, we can just banish the Revenants, it doesn't really matter here, to special summon out the Scar, but we are locked into Vendreads while the Scar is on the field, summoned by this effect. But that's not a problem, because now we can just link the Spirit Owl, which will get placed in the bottom of the deck per its own effect, and then link off the Scar, which will go back to grave, to make our copy of Add Vendread Savior here, where Vampire Sucker's other arrow points to. And now, at this point, we can go add Vendread Saviors on field effects to take a Vendread card in grave and add it back to hand. We can now add our Reorigin from our graveyard back to our hand that we pitched with the Hound Horde, which effectively makes the Hound Horde cost free in this combo. And we can pretty much go ahead and set our copy of Reorigin. And now we basically have a Necromancer for follow-up plus a free draw off the sucker. We have a Slayer with a Hound Horde and a Revenant's inherited effects. We have Add Vendread Savior here, which is obviously really annoying to deal with. And we have an IP plus Sucker setup, which means that on the opponent's turn, aside from the Slayer Disrupt and the Trap card Disrupt that we have with Reorigin, we are able to go IP and take herself and the Sucker, for example, to make ourselves a copy of SP Little Knight during the opponent's turn, which is obviously really strong disruption because the SP will, since she was summoned using an extra deck material, she will banish on summon. And then if that still isn't enough, we are able to utilize the graveyard effect of our, or not graveyard effect, we'll use the effect of our Reorigin to tribute an opponent's monster. And then because a monster was tributed on the field, that will trigger our Scar. It's something important to note that Scar triggers even if if a monster being tributed is not under our control. So if we tribute an opponent's monster, that does meet the activation requirement for Scar's grave effect, which means we can then go Scar, banishing a zombie from our grave, like Sucker, doesn't really matter, to bring back the Scar during the opponent's turn. And then, yeah, we're locked into Vendreads while he's on the board, but that's a non-issue. Because remember, at this point, if he leaves the field, he'll still float into another Vendread spell trap, so we get even more follow-up. And this is just a lot of disruption, plus ridiculous amounts of follow-up. Like I said, we have a Necromancer in hand, plus our draw from previous turn, and then we'll get another draw for our turn, and potentially even a search off a Scar if the opponent decides to like out it this turn, and it goes to grave, we get an additional search. So we'll, at the bare minimum, including our draw for next turn, should have a 4-card hand. Mind you, we only started with 2 cards for this combo, which was Necromancer and a Ready Fusion. So I just feel like that 2-card setup is obviously really impactful, in my opinion, and a pretty interesting way to use the brand new Duke of Demise fusion from the Maze of the Master. Now, some of you are probably wondering, well, what do you do in situations where you want to make the Abao? And if you're interested in that particular setup, I think what we have to do here is rewind a bit. If you want to make the Abao, as opposed to the combo that I just showed you here, using the IP and then going into SP on the opponent's turn, let me just rewind the combo here briefly. I believe we had a Necromancer, and then we also had the Changshi here. So at this juncture, we're still going to make the Sucker, obviously. This will get banished, this will go to grave. We had the Vampire Sucker here. And then I believe we ritual summoned using Evolution to bring out our Slayer by sending Scar from deck to grave. And then at that point, we took the Duke and the Slayer to make IP. However, in this particular instance, if we want to make the Abao, we're going to have to leave the Duke of Demise on field because he is our only fiend that we play currently. So we'll have to link off the Changshi and the Slayer to the graveyard. Remember, Changshi goes to the bottom of the deck because of her own restriction. That'll trigger the Slayer effect to search us Ravenous from deck to hand, and then we'll dump a copy of Hound Horde from our deck to the graveyard. And then at this point, what we can do is we can go... Oh, obviously we make the IP by using the Changshi and the Slayer. That was the point of that. You make IP still, but you don't make IP using Duke. You make IP using Slayer and Changshi instead. And then at this point, don't forget to resolve the Scar effect, which I forgot, my apologies. You would search Reorigin, and then that would be your discard for the Hound Horde, Grave effect, pitching Reorigin. Then you'll go Ravenous. Ravenous will bring out a Revenance from the deck, and you'll tribute the Hound Horde, which will be banished, tribute the Revenance, which will go to grave, to ritual summon your Slayer a second time, with both the inherited effects of Hound Horde and Revenance attached to it. And the only downside is that you won't be able to utilize Scar's Grave effect here to revive itself, meaning like you're not able to make a add Vendread Savior on top of this, because the reason for that is Scar will lock you into Vendreads while he's on the board, summoned by his own effects. So you'll have to forgo that for this combo, but you still basically get access to your Slayer with Hound Horde and Revenance effects, and then during the opponent's turn with your IP, you have to go IP plus Duke and the Sucker. I know it's really costly, and there's probably a better way to do this, so I'm going to leave it up to you duelists in the comments who are perceptive enough to maybe see if there's a better way to do that. But this is how you would make the Abao, basically, if you wanted to do that. Now, in my opinion, it's not as strong of an end board. Granted, yeah, the Abao has the destruction protection because you made her using an IP. You only get the one draw off the Sucker in that instance, but like I just feel like you lose out on follow-up, in my opinion. I mean, technically you get the follow-up back on the subsequent turn, assuming you survive, because you'll still have Duke and Grave. You can banish the Duke, which will just add back the copy of Necromancer anyway. It's just on a follow-up turn. Like, you don't get all the value right now. It's more of a delayed, return for your investment. But that's how you would make the Abao, using that same combo. It's just, instead of linking off the Duke, you would link off the Changshi, keeping Duke on field, because you need to be able to have a Fiend on board in order to make Abao, which is really the only downside. Personally, I wish Abao was just generic, but I guess that would just make her too broken. She would basically be Appaloosa Part 2. So I understand why she has restrictions built in. It's just kind of annoying, because you have to, to make her, you have to kind of combo awkwardly and sell yourself a little short, which I'm not too big of a fan of. But I do still feel like she is worth the payoff. Maybe there's a better line to make that, and I'll leave that up to you duelists to figure that out. But that's pretty much how you do the combo. Obviously, the first setup I think was much better, because you had way more disruption plus way more follow-up, in my opinion. But that's just to showcase you how you actually go into this, especially since I chose to cut the Nightmare Unicorn in favor of an IP and SP package. The only Fiend we now play in the entire deck, main deck and extra combined, happens to be the Duke of Demise. So that wraps up the first combo. I know that was a little long-winded, but I'm sure you duelists appreciate the time and effort I put into that, and the explanations hopefully were clear enough to understand. Before we wrap up the video, I want to do one more 2-card combo, and that's actually going to feature not Duke of Demise this time. It's going to feature a Diviner and the new package I'm running, the Goblin package. So we're going to have Diviner plus a Goblin Biker Grand Breakout for this 2-card combo. So for this instance, we're going to normal summon the Diviner, activate the effect. Now here's the cool thing. If your opponent has Impermer Veiler and they try to Impermer Veiler this is where the Goblin package really shines, because you will be able to, quick effect, because it is a quick play spell, tribute your own Diviner off the board to special a Goblin from your deck, and then their Imperm or Veiler will just fizzle because now the target is no longer there. So you'll force the Diviner through pretty much through a disruption, while also getting an additional body off the Breakout and a body off the Diviner's second effect because she was tributed. Grand Breakout tributes a monster. It does not matter how Diviner is tributed. As long as she is tributed, she will be able to use a secondary effect to special summon a fairy from the deck, which I think is pretty cool. Now, for the sake of the combo, we'll just assume that the opponent tried to imperm this. So we'll tribute it off the board. She'll basically forcing her to resolve. We'll send Herald of the Arclight. And then the Breakout will resolve, allowing us to summon our copy of Goblin Zombie from the deck, who is our only target. And then at resolution of that, we can go Chainlink 1 Herald, Chainlink 2 Diviner, or Chainlink 1 Diviner, Chainlink 2 Herald. It really doesn't matter however you want to sequence that, but Diviner will go ahead and summon out a copy of Rettime Reviver Emitter from the deck, who is a level 2 Dark Fairy Tuner. And then the Herald is basically just going to get us either a ritual monster or a ritual spell. Now, in this 2-card combo, what you search isn't that relevant because you're only getting half of the puzzle, right? You're not going to have the full setup necessarily. But I usually just like going for Vendread Evolution for this particular instance. And I will explain why momentarily. So we'll go for Evolution here. Now, it's important to note that the Rettime Reviver Emitter is a tuner, and the Goblin Zombie is a level 4 non-tuner, which does allow us to make a level 6 Synchro, which, as you saw in the previous combo featuring Duke, we can make our Immortal Dragon here. That will trigger the Graveyard effect of Goblin Zombie, which is mandatory when he's sent from field to grave, allowing us to add a zombie monster with 1200 or less defense from the deck to our hand. Now, that search can be a number of things. There's pretty much a lot of monsters that fit that stat line. We mainly could grab a copy of Volcarion, who serves as a really good extender for us in that instance, but Volcarion in this particular combo doesn't do us that much good because Immortal Dragon's already a tuner. So I think what ends up making a little bit more sense here is searching one of your Vendread rituals, because all of them happen to have 0 defense. So in this particular instance, we can grab a Slayer to our hand off of the effect of Goblin Zombie. And now we basically have our setup here. We have Evolution plus Slayer just in the hand this time, as opposed to on the first combo, the Slayer was in the grave. Now we can go on Mortal Dragon to Foolish Burial, a zombie, anything but a level 6, because this level has to change difference-wise. What you send here, again, could be anything you want. It really just depends on what you need access to at that given moment. You could send Follow-Up, you could send something like Al Ghul for protection. Pretty much the world's your oyster here. There's no right or wrong necessarily. I guess you could send something like a Necromancer, which maybe was the play, assuming we searched for Origin. But I think we should still be able to pull that off. I mean, there's so many different ways to play this deck. It's like I said, it's pretty much the world's your oyster in this scenario. But I guess we can just send something like a Necroworld Banshee here. At least try to get a Zombie World lock set up. Then we can go Evolution. Note that his level becomes 2 because it's the difference of what Banshee's level is. We can then send Scar Vendread here to our graveyard to perform our ritual summon of our Slayer from the hand. Scar's grave effect will trigger, allowing us to add a Vendread spell trap, of which I usually like searching the Reorigin. I just think it's such a good play. And then here we have access to quite a few things. We have access to a link play, so we can go into Vampire Sucker, add Vendread, or we have access to Synchro Lines, because remember, Immortal Dragon's now a level 2 in this particular instance. And because we started with the Diviner setup, we have plenty of level 2 tuners in grave, which means if we go for a Axel Synchro play, we can go into the Bestial Dissipator here. So I think that's probably the best thing we can do in this instance, if I'm being honest. I'd rather have a Dissipator as opposed to just a random draw off of Sucker. So let's link off the level 2 Immortal Dragon and our level 6 Slayer to make ourselves a copy of Axel Synchro Stardust. We will go Chainlink 1 Slayer, Chainlink 2 Axel to revive a level 2 or lower tuner from our graveyard. which could just be the emitter, it doesn't really matter. And then the Slayer will go ahead and resolve, allowing us to grab a ritual spell from the deck to our hand, of which I usually like searching Ravenous. And then we will send a Vendread monster from the deck to the graveyard, of which I like to send Hound Horde. Of course, if I could find it. Then, come on, where's my Hound Horde? There it is. Sorry about that. Now what we can do here is we can then synchro summon using the emitter and the Stardust to make ourselves a copy of Bestial Dissipator, which again, this is all just off a 2-card line, which I think is pretty cool. Just Diviner plus Goblin Biker Breakout is what got us here. What we can do now is we could go Hound Horde, pitch Reorigin to special summon itself. Then we can go activate Ravenous, bring out a copy of Revenants from the deck, assuming I could find it as well. That's the only problem with 60-card decks, and you gotta search so many times, it gets kind of annoying. Summon the Revenants face down defense, tribute to the Hound Horde who will be banished, and the Revenants who will go to grave. 2 ritual summon out Slayer from our graveyard. That will trigger the grave effect of our Scar. Since a monster on board is tributed, we can banish a zombie from our grave, which I like banishing the Goblin zombie. Reason for that is because with the other Vendread trap we play, we can cycle the Goblin zombie back, and that is an easy way to make our other copies of Grand Breakout live on subsequent turns. We'll special the Scar. Note that we are locked into Vendreads when he is summoned by this effect, and note that our Slayer does have the inherited effects of both Hound Horde as well as Revenants. We can then go Dissipator here, special summoning our copy of Hound Horde. Remember, we're Vendread locked because of the Scar's restriction. We can special our Hound Horde from Banished, and then we can take the Scar and the Hound Horde, who will both go to graveyard now, to link summon into add Vendread Savior, effectively breaking us out of the Vendread lock that the Scar put us under. And then we can go add Vendread Savior effect here to add ourselves a Reorigin to hand. And we can pretty much set it, and this is our end board off of just a Diviner plus Grand Breakout 2-card combo. We have a Bestial Dissipator who is live because we have at least 1 banish card to shuffle back. We have a Slayer who's able to quick effect banish spells and traps as well as special summon monsters. We have Add Vendread Savior who's just here for, you know, a Foolish Burial like effect as well as follow up. And we even have the Vendread Reorigin trap card in our back row, which just serves as an additional disruption, which when we resolve that will trigger our Scar to revive himself and just, again, apply more pressure on the board and give us even more follow-up. And we were able, through all this, to also set up a Necroworld Banshee in our grave, which we can banish at quick effect speeds to then activate a Zombie World directly from our deck, which against certain matchups could completely flood our opponent out of the game, depending on what kind of deck they're on. So we can also Zombie World lock through this combo as well, which again, all started with just Diviner plus Grand Breakout is what got us to this specific end board here. Now, obviously, there were different lines we could have potentially taken, but I think that's a pretty cool combo overall. Just as like the 2-card combo featuring oh my god, why am I drawing a blank on their names? Man, I need to get some rest or something. Just like the Necromancer and the Ready Fusion 2-card combo, you know, gives you some pretty interesting setup. So does the Diviner and Grand Breakout. So that's going to wrap up the combos for this video. Again, this is pushing over 30 minutes already. I didn't want the video to be terribly long. But hopefully you duelists enjoyed these simple 2-card combos for my Vendread deck list, you know, featuring the support post-Maze. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions, I am happy to hear them out in the comments. If you think that there was a better line I could have taken, also let me know. I'm always curious to see and improve my gameplay overall. But with that being said, this is going to be Nick hitting that end phase. Stay tuned for more amazing content coming your way post-Maze. I am working on a ABC update post-Maze featuring the new XYZ Dragon Cannon support. So be on the lookout for that. I'm currently testing that. I've already put little sneak peeks and previews of that deck in the Discord, which again, links in the description down below for that, as well as the link in the description for the Vendread deck profile as well. But with that being said, this is Nick. Thank you all for your continued support. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe. Peace.